Next up, the third way that rock can melt is heat transfer. And this is the one, this is the one that you might be the most familiar with, right? It just means it heats up, right? So anytime a rock is near something that's really, really hot, such as a magma chamber, that heat can be transferred to the rock, causing that rock to melt. All right, so going back to our figure, say we're starting at rock C, heat transfer means the temperature is increasing. So you'll go from C to A, eventually you'll cross the solidus and that rock will start to melt. This is very common at hotspots, right? Because hotspots are where you get those mantle plumes, those magma plumes. And typically the magma produced here is relatively mafic, right? There's less than 50% silica there. All right, a quick summary of the different ways that rocks can melt, focusing mainly on peridotite. So decompression melting at divergent plate boundaries. This is the most voluminous production of magma on Earth, and it produces a silica-rich basaltic magma. So silica-rich basaltic, meaning it's still a mafic rock, but it's less mafic than other basalts. Flux melting of the mantle occurs at subduction zones. This is when water is introduced, allowing the rocks to melt a little bit easier, and you'll get a very silica-rich and acidic magma, so that intermediate andesite. And then finally, heat transfer. This occurs at mantle hotspots. As we talked about, decompression melting also occurs at mantle hotspots, so we have both things going on there. And this produces a basaltic magma that's fairly mafic, right? So less than 50% silica. So now we've talked about where all of our different compositions come from, right? Mafic rocks come from mid-ocean ridges and hotspots. Intermediate rocks come from convergent boundaries with that flux melting. Felsic rocks come from, we haven't actually talked about this one yet, but they come from partial melting of young crustal rock granite. So anywhere that, rather than starting with peridotite of the mantle, you actually start melting the felsic rocks of the continent, you're going to get that felsic melt.